In the summer of 1948, the American League was the most exclusive and self-satisfied institution in all of American sports. It was a closed world of young men in the prime of their lives, a world that believed it represented the absolute pinnacle of the game of baseball, the very best players on the entire planet. And that summer, that world was turned completely upside down by a man they all assumed was finished. A man old enough to be the father of half the players on the field. A man who walked slowly, talked slowly, and moved through life like he had all the time in the world. His name was Leroy Robert Paige. But nobody called him that. To everyone who ever watched him throw a baseball, he was simply Satchel. And in 1948, at 42 years of age, in a game built almost entirely for the young, Satchel Paige did something that had never been done before and has never truly been matched since. He walked into Major League Baseball as the oldest rookie in the history of the sport, and instead of embarrassing himself, instead of proving all his doubters right, he humbled the entire league. He drew crowds so massive they set attendance records that still stand today. He threw shutouts against teams full of men half his age. He helped drag a franchise to a World Series title. And he did all of it while sports writers were openly mocking his signing as a joke. While the most respected voice in baseball journalism was calling him nothing more than a cheap publicity stunt. And by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why the men who actually faced him, the greatest hitters the game has ever produced, men like Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams, would spend the rest of their lives insisting that Satchel Paige was the best pitcher they ever saw. Not one of the best. The best. But to understand why 1948 mattered so much, why it carried so much weight, you have to understand what came before it. You have to understand the 2 decades of injustice that made that summer possible. Leroy Paige was born in Mobile, Alabama on July 7, 1906. Now that date comes with an enormous asterisk, because Paige spent his entire life turning his own age into a running joke, a mystery he never had any interest in solving. He loved the confusion. He fed it. When people asked how old he was, he would ask them right back, "How old would you be if you didn't know how old you are?" His birth certificate said 1906, but plenty of people who saw him pitch in 1948 were convinced he had to be older, that he was hiding years, that the real number was closer to 50. And Satchel never bothered to correct any of them. The uncertainty was part of his legend, and he knew it. He was one of 12 children. His father was a gardener, and his mother took in washing to help feed the family. As a boy, he earned money carrying bags at the local train station, and the story goes that he rigged up a contraption of poles and rope to carry several satchels at once, which is how he supposedly got the nickname that would follow him for the rest of his life. Satchel. By his own account, he gave up baseball just for fun and started treating it as a career when he was still a teenager. He was tall and impossibly lean, eventually reaching 6'3" with longer arms and enormous feet, and a delivery that seemed to come out of nowhere. He turned professional in the late 1920s, and from that point forward, he began building a reputation that would eventually make him the most famous baseball player in America that most white fans had never been allowed to see. Because here is the cruel truth at the center of everything. Satchel Paige was, by almost universal agreement, one of the greatest pitchers who ever lived. And for the entire span of his physical prime, from his 20s into his early 40s, he was banned from Major League Baseball for one reason and one reason only: the color of his skin. There was no rule written down anywhere that said black players couldn't play in the majors. There didn't need to be. It was an unwritten agreement. A gentleman's agreement that had kept the game segregated since the 19th century. And so the best pitcher on the planet spent his prime years in the Negro Leagues and on the barnstorming circuit, traveling tens of thousands of miles a year, pitching in hundreds of games, hopping from town to town in search of paydays and competition wherever he could find it. And he pitched for everyone: the Birmingham Black Barons, the Pittsburgh Crawfords, the Kansas City Monarchs. By his own estimate, he played for around 250 different teams over the course of his career. He barnstormed up to 30,000 miles in a single year. One year, he reportedly pitched 29 days in a row. He was a one-man traveling circus, an attraction, a phenomenon, and everywhere he went, people paid money just to watch him throw. And what they saw was something they had never seen before. Satchel Paige didn't just throw hard, though he threw as hard as anyone alive. He threw with pinpoint control that bordered on the supernatural. There are countless stories, and while some of them have surely grown taller in the retelling, the sheer volume of them tells you something real. He would set a chewing gum wrapper down on home plate and throw strikes over it. When he tried out for Cleveland, the owner claimed Paige threw 4 of 5 pitches directly over a cigarette he'd laid down as a target. One of his catchers with the St. Louis Browns swore that Paige once threw 6 strikes out of 10 pitches over a gum wrapper. He gave his pitches names, colorful names that became part of his mythology. He had the B-ball, which he said would always be where he wanted it to be. He had the trouble ball, the jump ball, the long tom fastball, and the midnight rider. And most famously of all, he had the hesitation pitch, a delivery where he would pause mid-wind-up, freezing for just an instant, completely destroying the hitter's timing before the ball came screaming toward the plate. That pitch became so effective, so unfair, that after he reached the majors, the American League president actually moved to ban it. There was the showmanship too. On barnstorming tours, Paige would occasionally call his outfielders in, wave them off the field entirely, or sit them down behind the infield, and then strike out the side with nobody standing behind him. He would tell hitters exactly what pitch was coming and exactly where it would be, and then throw it right past them anyway. He had a routine where he'd drive nails into a board with his pitches, using the baseball like a hammer, and reportedly he rarely needed more than 10 throws to do it. But the most powerful evidence of just how great Satchel Paige was doesn't come from Paige himself, or from the fans who adored him. It comes from the white Major League stars who faced him in exhibition games during the off-seasons. Because throughout the 1930s and into the 1940s, the barnstorming circuit allowed black stars and white stars to finally meet on the same field. And when they did, Satchel Paige made the best hitters in the major leagues look absolutely helpless. Joe DiMaggio, the Yankee Clipper, one of the most gifted hitters in the history of the game, called Paige the best and fastest pitcher he had ever faced. DiMaggio even said that the moment he knew he was ready for the big leagues was the day he finally managed to get a single hit off of Satchel Paige in an exhibition game. Think about that. DiMaggio measured his own readiness for greatness by whether he could touch Paige. Dizzy Dean, the fireballing Cardinals ace and a Hall of Famer in his own right, was maybe Paige's biggest admirer of all. The two of them squared off many times in exhibition games, and Paige usually came out on top. Dean once said that Paige was a better pitcher than he ever hoped to be. He said his own fastball looked like a changeup next to the little pistol bullet that old Satchel fired up to the plate. Dean even claimed that if the two of them had ever been allowed to pitch on the same team, they'd have clinched the pennant by the 4th of July and gone fishing until the World Series. Ted Williams, widely considered the greatest pure hitter who ever lived, flatly called Paige the greatest pitcher in baseball. Bob Feller, one of the hardest throwers in Major League history, spent many off-seasons barnstorming right alongside Paige, and even Feller, a man who thought very highly of his own ability, admitted that Paige was the best pitcher he had ever seen. Hall of Fame outfielder Hack Wilson described Paige's fastball by saying it started out like a baseball, and by the time it reached the plate, it looked like a marble. And once, in a single exhibition game, Paige is said to have struck out the great Rogers Hornsby, one of the finest hitters of all time, 5 times. There's a story that gets told about a manager of that era watching Paige dominate, who reportedly said he'd have a 30-game winner on his hands if only he could find a way to paint Paige white. It's a line that captures the whole tragedy in a single sentence. Everyone knew. Every single person in baseball knew exactly how good Satchel Paige was, and they let him rot on the outside anyway. And these weren't isolated opinions from 1 or 2 sentimental old-timers. They came from every corner of the game. Lefty Gomez, a Hall of Fame pitcher himself, called Paige the greatest pitcher he ever saw or ever hoped to see. Pie Traynor called him one of the greatest pitchers he'd ever faced and openly regretted that the color line kept him out of organized baseball. Hall of Fame catcher Biz Mackey said Paige's fastball could pound a steak into hamburger. Dizzy Dean, never shy with an opinion, declared that Paige would be worth $100,000 to any major league club, an astronomical sum in the depths of the Depression. When the best players in the white major leagues were asked who the finest pitcher in the world was, the answer, over and over again, was a man they weren't even allowed to play alongside. And the barnstorming games weren't rigged in Paige's favor either. These were real games, with real pride on the line, Major League All-Stars trying their absolute hardest to prove they could hit the black pitcher everyone was raving about. And more often than not, they couldn't. Paige faced entire lineups of big league talent, generation after generation of them, and came away victorious far more often than he lost. He outdueled the Dean brothers, he beat the best of the American and National Leagues. He built his legend not against semi-pro nobodies, but against the very men who would later be enshrined in Cooperstown. That is what makes the exhibition record so damning. The major leagues didn't keep Paige out because they doubted him. They kept him out because they knew exactly what he'd do to their game if they let him in. So Paige waited. He kept pitching, kept traveling, kept winning, kept getting older. And as the years piled up, it began to look like his chance would never come. His friend and fellow Negro League star Buck O'Neil later said that Paige made more money than just about any pitcher of the era through his barnstorming, but that nobody ever seriously tried to bring him into the major leagues. O'Neil recalled that every so often someone would talk to Paige about it, and he'd get excited, get his hopes up, and then it would fall apart. And Paige would tell his friend that they were never going to sign old Satch. Then, in 1947, everything changed. Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier with the Brooklyn Dodgers, ending decades of segregation in the major leagues. And suddenly, the door that had been bolted shut for Paige's entire career was cracked open. Later that same year, the Cleveland Indians signed Larry Doby, integrating the American League. But 1947 came and went, and still no call for Satchel Paige. He was too old, they said. His time had passed. Whatever chance he'd once had was gone. The greatest pitcher many people had ever seen was going to be left behind by the very revolution he had spent 20 years making possible. And that's where the man who would change everything enters the story. Bill Veeck. Bill Veeck was the owner of the Cleveland Indians, and he was unlike any owner the game had ever seen. He was a showman, a maverick, a P.T. Barnum figure who understood better than anyone that baseball was entertainment. He'd already made history by signing Larry Doby, and in the middle of the 1948 season, with his Indians locked in one of the tightest pennant races in years, Veeck decided to do something that would make him the target of ridicule across the entire baseball world. He decided to sign a 42-year-old rookie. Veeck did it his way, which is to say, with a flair for the dramatic. He kept the whole thing a secret. He smuggled Paige into Cleveland Stadium and had him put on a private pitching demonstration in front of the people who mattered. Manager Lou Boudreau, coach Bill McKechnie, general manager Hank Greenberg, and according to some accounts, the legendary Tris Speaker. This was the audition. The old man against the doubters. Boudreau, who was not just the manager, but also the team's star shortstop and an excellent hitter, stepped into the batter's box himself to see what this ancient rookie had left. And what he saw convinced him instantly. Paige placed the ball wherever he wanted, again and again, hitting Boudreau's target with the ease of a man threading a needle. The Cleveland brass walked away from that private tryout convinced that whatever this man's real age was, he still had more than enough left to help a team fighting for a pennant. On July 7, 1948, his 42nd birthday by the calendar, Satchel Paige signed a major league contract with the Cleveland Indians. He was officially the oldest rookie in the history of the game. And the reaction was brutal. The most influential publication in the sport was the Sporting News, known throughout baseball as the Bible of the game. Its editor, J.G. Taylor Spink, took one look at the signing and tore into it. He condemned the move as nothing more than a demeaning publicity stunt. He argued it was beneath the dignity of the major leagues. And here's the part that reveals the ugliness underneath the criticism. That very same season, plenty of aging white players were being signed by teams, and Spink had nothing to say about any of them. It was only the signing of the 42-year-old black pitcher that he decided was a cheap circus act unworthy of the game. Spink wasn't alone in his skepticism. A columnist for the New York Times wrote, the day before Paige's debut, that the speed was gone from his arm and only his cunning remained. openly questioning how much help an old man like this could possibly provide. So this was the situation. Satchel Paige, denied his prime by the color of his skin, finally getting his chance 2 decades too late, walking into a league that assumed he would fail. Greeted by the most respected voice in baseball calling his very presence a joke. The stage could not have been set more perfectly for humiliation. Everyone expected the old man to fall flat on his face. They could not have been more wrong. Paige made his major league debut on July 9, 1948, coming out of the bullpen against the St. Louis Browns. He threw 2 innings in relief, gave up 2 hits, and did not allow a run. Nothing flashy, just a quiet, competent first appearance from a man who had been pitching professionally since before some of the batters he faced were born. It was the beginning of something remarkable, though nobody knew it yet. The real fireworks came a few weeks later when Boudreau decided to give the old man a start. On August 3, 1948, Satchel Paige made his first major league start, and Cleveland Stadium responded in a way that told everyone this was no ordinary event. On a Tuesday night, for a game against the Washington Senators, more than 72,000 fans poured into the ballpark. 72,000 people. On a weeknight, to watch a 42-year-old rookie pitch. The pennant race was part of the draw, sure, but everyone knew the real reason those turnstiles were spinning. They were there for Satchel, and Paige gave them a show. He pitched 7 strong innings and led the Indians to a 5-3 victory. The old man wasn't just surviving in the major leagues. He was winning games in front of packed houses that had come specifically to see him. But if the doubters were still holding out, still waiting for the inevitable collapse, the next 2 weeks erased any doubt forever. Because in a stretch of just a few days in the middle of August, Satchel Paige did something that no publicity stunt could ever fake. He dominated. On August 13, 1948, the Indians traveled to Chicago to face the White Sox at Comiskey Park, and the city of Chicago responded with a frenzy. A crowd of 51,013 packed into the ballpark, one of the largest baseball crowds the city had ever seen to that point. An estimated 15,000 more were turned away at the gates, unable to get in. Before the game, Paige was honored with a trophy, recognizing him as one of America's most famous athletes. And the old man, gracious as ever, simply thanked them and said he was deeply honored. Then he went out and pitched the first shutout of his major league career. He threw a complete game, 5-hit shutout, blanking the White Sox 5-0. At one point, he retired 12 batters in a row. Then he retired 10 more in another stretch. This was not an old man hanging on. This was a master at work, carving up a major league lineup with the same precision he'd shown for 2 decades on the barnstorming circuit. The 50,000 fans who'd fought their way into Comiskey Park had come to see a legend, and the legend had delivered exactly what they came for. 1 week later came the crowning moment, the game that would enter the record books and stay there for the better part of a century. On August 20th, 1948, back home in Cleveland, the White Sox came to Municipal Stadium for a rematch. And this time, the crowd wasn't just large, it was historic. More than 78,000 fans, 78,382 to be exact, jammed into the stadium for a night game. It remains to this day the largest crowd ever to attend a night game in Major League Baseball history. A record set more than 75 years ago by a 42-year-old rookie that has never been broken. And Satchel Paige, standing on the mound before the biggest night game crowd in the history of the sport, pitched the game of a lifetime. Another complete game shutout. This time he allowed just 3 hits, beating the White Sox 1-0 in a tense, masterful performance. 2 shutouts in the span of a week, in front of a combined crowd of well over 100,000 people, thrown by a man that the Bible of baseball had called a publicity stunt just weeks earlier. Let's put the attendance numbers together because they tell the story better than anything else could. Across just 3 of Satchel Paige's starts that summer, more than 200,000 fans came out to watch him pitch. 201,829 to be precise. That is a staggering figure for the era. Bill Veek's supposed publicity stunt had become the single biggest draw in all of baseball. Everywhere Paige went, he set records. He filled ballparks that had never been filled. The old man that nobody wanted, that everybody said was finished, was selling more tickets than any player in the game. But here is what truly humbled the American League. It wasn't just the crowds. Crowds could be dismissed as curiosity, as spectacle, as people coming out to gawk at an old man. What could not be dismissed were the numbers he put up against the best hitters in the world. By the end of the 1948 season, Satchel Paige had appeared in 21 games for the Cleveland Indians. He'd worked as both a reliever and a spot starter, doing whatever the team needed in the heat of a pennant race. And his final record was 6 wins and a single loss. 6-1. But it was his earned run average that silenced the critics for good. Paige finished the season with an ERA of around 2.48, one of the very best marks in the entire American League. He struck out nearly twice as many batters as he walked. These were not the numbers of a novelty act. These were the numbers of an elite major league pitcher produced by a man old enough to be a grandfather. And his contribution to the pennant race was very real. The Indians and the Boston Red Sox finished the regular season tied atop the American League, forcing a 1-game playoff for the pennant, which Cleveland won. The 6 games Paige contributed down the stretch in a race decided by a single game were not a sideshow. They may well have been the difference between winning the pennant and going home. Cleveland went on to the World Series against the Boston Braves. And there, Satchel Paige added one final piece of history to his remarkable season. Called into Game 5 in relief, he became the first black pitcher ever to appear in a World Series game. He threw 2/3 of an inning and did not allow a hit. The Indians won the championship 4-2, capturing the 1948 World Series title. And here's a detail that gives that season even more weight in hindsight. That 1948 championship remains to this day the last World Series title the Cleveland franchise has ever won. More than 75 years and counting. And the oldest rookie in the history of the game was right in the middle of it. When the season ended and the awards were handed out, Paige finished 4th in the Rookie of the Year voting. And his reaction to that was pure Satchel. When asked about it, he responded with a line that perfectly captured the absurdity of a man his age being considered a rookie at all. He said he wasn't quite sure what year the gentleman had in mind. Because that was the thing about Satchel Paige. Even as he was making the entire American League eat its words, even as he was setting attendance records and throwing shutouts and winning a championship, he never lost the wow-it, the ease, the sly humor that had made him a folk hero for decades. He didn't rage against the years he'd lost. He didn't lecture the writers who'd mocked him. He just went out, did the impossible, and cracked jokes about it afterward. His whole philosophy of life could be summed up in the sayings he became famous for. Don't look back, he warned, because something might be gaining on you. He advised that age was a case of mind over matter, and that if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. And whatever his actual age was, that summer of 1948 proved his point better than any words ever could. The number on the birth certificate didn't matter. The talent was ageless, and maybe that's the most humbling thing of all for the league that had shut him out. Because 1948 wasn't even the end of the story. Not even close. The Indians released Paige after the 1949 season, and he sat out of the majors entirely in 1950. Most people assumed that was finally it, that the old man's improbable run was over for good. But then Bill Veeck resurfaced, this time as the owner of the St. Louis Browns, and in 1951 he brought Satchel Paige back into the major leagues. Paige was now around 45 years old. And in 1952, at an age when nearly every man who ever played the game had long since retired, Satchel Paige had one of the finest seasons of his major league career. He won 12 games for a terrible Browns team that lost 90, posting an earned run average right around 3, leading the entire American League in games finished. He was so good that year, and again the next, that he was named to the American League All-Star team in both 1952 and 1953, making him the first black pitcher ever selected to the American League squad, at 45 and 46 years of age. In 1952, at 46, he threw a complete game shutout against the Detroit Tigers, a 12-inning masterpiece, won 1-0, briefly making him the oldest man ever to throw a shutout in the major leagues. And then, incredibly, there was one more ACT. In 1965, more than a decade after most people thought he'd thrown his last major league pitch, the Kansas City Athletics brought Satchel Paige back for a single game. He was 59 years old. 59, and on September 25, 1965, he took the mound and threw 3 scoreless innings against the Boston Red Sox, giving up just 1 hit. Between innings, they moved a rocking chair into the dugout for him, and he sat and rested like the old master he was. To this day, he remains the oldest man ever to pitch in a Major League Baseball game, a record that will almost certainly never be broken. In 1971, the Baseball Hall of Fame finally did what the game should have done 30 years earlier. Satchel Paige was elected to Cooperstown, becoming the first player ever inducted primarily for his career in the Negro Leagues. The doors that had been slammed in his face for the entirety of his prime were, at long last, thrown wide open. It was recognition that came far too late to give him back the years he'd lost, but it was recognition nonetheless, an admission carved in bronze that this man belonged among the immortals of the sport. So when we talk about how a 42-year-old Satchel Paige humbled the entire major leagues, we're really talking about a kind of vindication that transcended baseball itself. For 20 years, the game had told him he wasn't wanted. The writers had said he was too old, that the speed was gone from his arm, that his signing was a joke, a stunt, an embarrassment to the dignity of the major leagues. And Satchel Paige answered every last one of them, not with anger, but with performance, with shutouts, with record crowds, with a championship ring, with numbers that no honest person could ever wave away. He proved that everything they'd whispered about him for 2 decades was true, that the tall tales from the barnstorming circuit weren't exaggerations, that when DiMaggio and Williams and Dean called him the best pitcher they'd ever faced, they weren't being generous, they were being accurate. He proved that the only thing that had ever kept him out of the major leagues was prejudice, plain and simple, and that when finally given the chance, even as an old man well past his prime, he was still better than pitchers half his age. Think about what it means that his greatest attendance records were set not in his 20s or 30s, but at 42. Think about what it means that the largest night game crowd in the history of Major League Baseball came out to watch a rookie old enough to have grandchildren. Think about what it means that the last championship a franchise won in over 7 decades was won with a 42-year-old first-year player on the roster, throwing shutouts down the stretch of a pennant race. It was unbelievable and still an amazing story until today. The men who ran baseball spent 20 years pretending Satchel Paige didn't exist because they couldn't imagine a black man belonging in their league. And when they finally, grudgingly, let him in as a novelty, as a gate attraction, as a supposed stunt, he turned around and became one of the best pitchers in the American League. He didn't just meet their low expectations, he shattered them, the same way his fastball shattered the confidence of every hitter who ever dug in against him. That is the true meaning of humbling the major leagues. Not with taunts, not with revenge, but by being so undeniably, so effortlessly great, that a league built to exclude him had no choice but to marvel at what it had been missing all along. Satchel Paige passed away in 1982, and the exact number of years he lived remains fittingly a subject of some debate, just the way he always liked it. But his legacy isn't measured in years anyway. It's measured in the impossibility of what he did. A man who was denied his prime and still became a legend. A man who arrived decades too late and still rewrote the record books. A man who was called finished at 42 and responded by making the greatest league in the world look, for one unforgettable summer, like it didn't know what it was talking about. They thought they were signing an old man for a cheap laugh. Instead, they got the oldest rookie in history and one of the greatest pitchers who ever lived. All in the same ageless, ambling, unhittable package, and baseball has never seen anything like him since. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most remarkable stories in sports history, do us a favor and like this video and subscribe to the channel for more untold stories from the world of baseball and beyond. Remember the words of old Satchel Paige himself. Don't look back. Something might be gaining on you. Until next time.